On the one hand, throwing President Biden under the microscope was exactly what McCarthy wanted. On the other hand, he wanted to do it his way, with his people, using his committees. Here was the Republican leader this morning before Garland's announcement.
We don't think there needs to be a special prosecutor. I think Congress has to investigate this.
In the end, it's kind of awkward to claim the federal government is weaponized against you when it is simultaneously announcing a criminal investigation into your political opponent. Joining us now is Charlie Savage, who is covering this story for the New York Times, and Matt Miller, former chief spokesman for the Obama Justice Department. Thank you both for being here. Charlie, I wonder if you can tell us at all from your reporting the degree to which Garland was making a political calculation, among other things here, the degree to which the pressure that the right wing had been, the campaign, I will say, that they had been waging against Merrick Garland for these 2 years has had its effect inside the DOJ.
Well, he would never admit that that's the case. But of course, he's part of the real world. He sees it. He feels it. One of the things that was interesting to learn today was about more recent pressure that's been put on Merrick Garland. Since someone leaked the fact of the first tranche being found to CBS News on Monday, which brought this to public attention, there's been a tremendous amount of calls on Merrick Garland to do just this, notwithstanding Kevin McCarthy's reluctance. And then someone leaked again to NBC on Wednesday, the second tranche had been found, and the calls only redoubled. And then today he appoints a special counsel. And one of the interesting things he said was the recommendation to him, the decision to appoint a special counsel, had been last week before any of this became public and these calls began. And so if that's right, and I have no reason to doubt that that's right, it means that what looked like a pressure campaign on him was already beside the point.
Matt, you've logged some time at the DOJ. How do you read this decision on the part of Garland and the timetable, as Charlie points out?
I think that this is a decision that Merrick Garland basically pressured himself into. I think if you look at the decision in isolation, this isn't one where a special counsel was necessarily warranted or required. I don't think there's any reason to read the special counsel regulations as requiring the appointment of a special counsel any time there's an investigation that touches on the president, or they could just make that clear that that's what is required rather than leave it to the discretion of the attorney general. But I think by appointing an attorney general, by appointing a special counsel to investigate former President Trump, and declaring by doing that this is not the kind of investigation that can be handled in the normal course of business by career prosecutors or U.S. attorneys in the Department of Justice, he then basically boxed himself in and left himself no choice but to appoint a special counsel here. If there was a conflict of interest in the Trump case, that conflict is even more acute in a case that involves the sitting president. So I think this is a decision that while there was a lot of pressure from the outside, really it's a decision that he forced on himself.
Matt, you've tweeted that you think special counsel can lead to all sorts of bad places. Can you enumerate what those bad places are and what the potential risk here is?
Well, I think there are two things. One, I think that when attorneys general start to go outside the normal process and make a decision that you can't count on the career men and women in the regular order and the U.S. attorneys who have been confirmed by the Senate to handle sensitive cases, and you have to appoint a special prosecutor for every one of them, you then lead yourself to appointing special counsels in cases where they're not needed. For example, this one. I don't think one was necessary in the Trump case, and I certainly don't think one was necessary here. But as I said, having appointed one in the first case, you're necessarily required one in the second. And then the history of special counsels shows that oftentimes they tend to go in all kinds of places you don't expect. This is different than the situation in the 1990s when there were independent counsels that really weren't accountable to the attorney general. This special counsel will be accountable to directly, supervised by the AG. But if he wants to pursue something that isn't necessarily in his current mandate, there'll be a lot of pressure on the sitting attorney general to do so. And this is someone who I have no reason to doubt his integrity, but he was a political appointee in the previous administration. So it is outsourcing a lot of the attorney general's responsibility to someone who is not, has not come up inside the normal, regular DOJ order.
And that's Charlie, to you, the fact that Robert Hur, the special counsel here, was a political appointee in the Trump administration. What do we know about him? His choice seems to be greeted with some consternation among certain parts of the Biden administration and beyond, given the fact that He is someone that donated to Republican campaigns. As Matt says, he's an appointee during the Trump administration. What do we know about Robert Hur?
Well, he had been a career prosecutor in Maryland. He had worked for Chris Wray, now the FBI director, in the Bush administration when Chris Wray was the head of the criminal division in the George W. Bush Justice Department. He had clerked for then Chief Justice William Rehnquist after law school. So he's clearly a conservative Republican. And then in the Trump administration, he took on political appointments, first as a very powerful official in the Deputy Attorney General's office under Rod Rosenstein, and then as the U.S. Attorney in Maryland. I think this is part of what's interesting about this is Merrick Garland once again reaching to a Trump-appointed current or former U.S. attorney to handle a politically sensitive case or matter, as a matter, obviously, of political shielding himself of bias accusations. He's got a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Delaware handling the Hunter Biden investigation. And before this appointment, he had a different Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Chicago doing the preliminary look at the Biden documents matter. And that stands in sharp contrast to the style of his predecessor, Bill Barr, in the Trump administration, who, when he had very politically contentious cases, was reaching to fellow Trump-appointed Republican U.S. attorneys to look at things like allegations that the Obama people had improperly unmasked Trump associates in intelligence reports. Secondly, certainly taking another look at the Russia investigation and cases that spun off of that, like the matter into Mike Flynn. All of those were fellow Republicans looking at that, as opposed to Merrick Garland, who's looking for the other party to handle these matters.
Yeah, and then you can read into that something, right? First of all, the irony that Merrick Garland is in some respect, extending an olive branch or trying to convince potentially skeptical Republicans that, in fact, this is legitimate. The DOJ hasn't been weaponized. Everything is fair and above board when it comes to the Justice Department. I mean, that is ironic, given how Merrick Garland was treated by some of the very same right-wing critics here. Matt, do you see a calculation here being made about a potential criminal indictment for Mar-a-Lago? The fact that Merrick Garland is making sure everything is treated in an above-board fashion on the Biden classified documents, perhaps in preparation for something even more controversial as it pertains to Mar-a-Lago? Or am I getting ahead of myself?
No, I think that's certainly part of it. I think he's looking at these two cases, and even though these two cases really, except for the fact that they involve, at the first instance, classified documents being in a place they're not supposed to be, in every other way look different. You have one where where President Biden self-reported that these documents were there, turned them over voluntarily, conducted additional searches, and turned them over versus the way the former president handled them. There are obviously very different cases, but I think he looked at it and said, to be, if one case is headed for indictment, I have to make sure that the decision in the Biden case, which looks to be a routine investigation based on what we know now, there could be facts we don't know, but if the facts that we know turn out to be the only facts, then it's a case that is very unlikely to end in any kind of criminal indictment. I suspect the decision is I have to give the public confidence that both of these cases have been treated fairly, and so I have two special counsels. One may come up with a recommendation of no indictment, and that will give further credibility to the decision possibly to indict former President Trump.
Charlie, what does the special counsel do here on a practical level? I mean, there was a lot of obfuscation, which I think is putting it mildly, as it pertained to Trump and the Mar-a-Lago document scandal. There doesn't seem to be as much here. There are questions about the timetable and when these announcements were made and when the Biden administration chose to acknowledge that these documents were in the president's possession. But beyond that, the administration has been pretty forthcoming with the DOJ and the National Archives. Do you have a sense of what the special counsel will be investigating now that he has been appointed?
Well, he'll have to come in and look at what his predecessor, Mr. Lausch out of Chicago, has already uncovered, what interviews they've already conducted. He'll want to hire some staff and get an office set up just as a routine course of things. But you're right. This doesn't look like, based on what we know now, like there's that much to investigate. But we don't know exactly who packed up those boxes. We don't know, were those documents accessed? Did anyone go into that closet and rifle through that box or not? They're going to be asking questions like that to the extent that Lausch hasn't already established it. And again, we don't know what his findings are, but there doesn't seem to be nearly the complexity of the Mar-a-Lago documents matter to examine. And so one question in my mind is just how long this could possibly last.
Maybe it won't last that long. Maybe it will be a pro forma exercise. We'll see. Charlie Savage, Washington correspondent for the New York Times, and Matt Miller, former chief spokesman for the Obama Justice Department. Thank you both for joining me tonight, guys.